nearly spat out my morning coffee when I saw the announcement on our neighborhood's internal message board. There, in bold lettering, was an invitation to a wine tasting and auction fundraiser to be held at, of all places, my vineyard. My vineyard. The property I had purchased with my life savings 6 months ago, which I tended alone every day, and which, most importantly, no one had asked permission to use. I scrolled through the details in disbelief. A date had been set for next weekend, tickets were already being promoted, and they'd even included professional-looking mock-ups of my rows of ripening grapes with tables and tents superimposed on them. Have you ever had someone plan a party at your house without asking? Well, imagine that, but with hundreds of neighbors and alcohol involved. I wonder where you're reading this from. Have you ever encountered a homeowners association that's quite this audacious? Drop a comment below and share your HOA horror stories. I promise mine might top them all. The announcement had been posted by Karen Westfield, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood's HOA board. The post described my vineyard as the beautiful, underutilized property belonging to our newest, rather reclusive resident. Underutilized? Reclusive? I had been cultivating those vines every day since moving in. The fact that I didn't attend their monthly meetings to argue about the acceptable height of lawn grass had apparently marked me as antisocial. Karen had written that the owner likely doesn't fully understand our community guidelines yet, and that the HOA retains certain oversight privileges for properties that impact the neighborhood aesthetic. This was complete fiction, of course. My vineyard was entirely my property, properly zoned agricultural, and nowhere in any homeowner's agreement did it state they had any right to it whatsoever. I had moved to this quiet suburb 6 months ago precisely because I wanted privacy. What Karen and the rest of the neighborhood didn't know was that I wasn't just some random person with a vineyard hobby. I was actually the winemaker and owner behind Obscurus Vines, a boutique label that had been gaining significant attention in wine circles. I kept this identity closely guarded, not out of shame, but because I valued my creative process and didn't want the distraction that came with recognition. Winemaking was both my livelihood and my passion, and I had specifically chosen this property for its perfect soil composition, microclimate, and, ironically, its supposed privacy. The comments on Karen's post were a mix of excitement and questions. People were already planning outfits, discussing carpooling options, and asking where to buy tickets. Not a single person questioned whether this was legitimate or whether I had actually agreed to this. The assumption seemed to be that whatever Karen decreed must be authorized. I knew I needed to stop this, but rushing in with guns blazing would only create unnecessary drama. Instead, I took screenshots, saved the post, and began contemplating my strategy. If there's one thing winemaking had taught me, it was patience. Sometimes the best vintages come from knowing exactly when to act and when to wait. Karen had concluded her announcement with details about ticket prices, $45 per person ostensibly to support community projects, and a request for volunteers to help set up tables and tents. She'd included a smiling photo of herself holding a wine glass, standing in front of what was clearly the edge of my property, taken without permission. The final line read, "This exclusive event is scheduled for next Saturday at 3 p.m. Wine will be provided, but feel free to bring your favorite bottle to share. Let's make this a neighborhood tradition." A tradition? On my private property? Without my knowledge or consent? This wasn't just presumptuous. It bordered on illegal. I closed my laptop and walked onto my porch, looking out at the rows of grapevines that stretched across my 5 acres. The Cabernet Sauvignon was coming in beautifully this season, the grapes plump and developing that deep, rich color that promised an excellent vintage. Merlot and Syrah were thriving in their respective sections. This wasn't just land to me. It was my art studio, my legacy, and now Karen wanted to turn it into a party venue for her social climbing. The question wasn't whether I would stop her, but how. I needed to be strategic, because based on what I'd heard about Karen Westfield, she wouldn't back down easily. It was time to reveal myself, but on my terms. and in a way that would ensure this kind of presumption never happened again. Karen Westfield had built quite a reputation in the 6 months since I'd moved to the neighborhood. From conversations with other residents, I'd pieced together that she had joined the HOA board 3 years ago and quickly established herself as the most vocal and most feared member. Within a year, she had maneuvered herself into the role of president through what one neighbor described as sheer force of will and the ability to outlast everyone else in argument. She wasn't elected so much as she wore everyone down until they conceded power to her. Her reign of minor tyranny was well documented among the residents. The Johnsons on Maple Street had been fined $200 for painting their front door a shade of blue that Karen deemed too tropical for our community aesthetic. The elderly Mr. Peterson had received weekly notices about his lawn being a quarter-inch too high, despite his arthritis making frequent mowing difficult. The Castillos had been forced to remove a small vegetable garden from their front yard because Karen insisted it lowered property values, despite several neighbors expressing their admiration for the well-maintained plot. All of these stories circulated in hushed tones, usually accompanied by resigned shrugs. Fighting Karen wasn't worth the hassle, most had concluded. They'd rather pay the fines or comply than deal with her relentless pursuit of what she called neighborhood standards. The day after I discovered her announcement, my doorbell rang just as I was finishing up some paperwork for my latest wine shipment. Through the peephole, I saw Karen herself, standing on my porch with a folder tucked under her arm and an expectant expression on her face. I took a deep breath, put on my most neutral expression, and opened the door. Karen was exactly as I'd seen in her photographs, mid-50s, blonde hair cut in an angled bob, wearing a crisp white blouse tucked into khaki pants. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were busy scanning my living room behind me, presumably looking for violations. "Good morning. I'm Karen Westfield, HOA president. I don't believe we've formally met, though I've seen you working in your vineyard. May I come in? I have some exciting news to discuss." She didn't wait for a response before stepping past me into my foyer, her heels clicking authoritatively on the hardwood floor. She didn't offer her hand to shake, but instead gestured vaguely with the folder she was carrying. "I've brought the event plan for the wine tasting. I figured you'd want to see how we're going to set everything up. It's going to be quite the boost for community morale, and your social standing, of course. You've been something of a mystery since moving in." I maintained my composure, closing the door slowly and turning to face her. "Ms. Westfield, I saw your post online. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't agreed to host any event on my property." I kept my tone even, curious to see how she would respond to this straightforward contradiction. Karen's smile faltered only momentarily before returning, now tinged with condescension. She waved my concern away as if batting at an annoying fly. "Oh, don't worry about the details. As HOA president, I can assure you that community events fall under our jurisdiction. Your vineyard is the perfect setting, and frankly, it's a way for you to finally contribute to the neighborhood. You've been here 6 months and hardly attended any functions. People are starting to talk." The audacity was breathtaking. She opened her folder and began spreading papers across my coffee table without asking, revealing printouts of seating arrangements, a timeline, and what appeared to be a mock-up poster advertising the event with a photo of my vineyard prominently featured. "We're expecting about 100 people. We'll handle all the setup and cleanup, of course. All you need to do is stay out of the way." She handed me a paper that upon closer inspection appeared to be some sort of agreement. "Just sign here, acknowledging that you're allowing temporary access. It's a formality, really. The HOA bylaws already give us the right to utilize property for community events." I took the paper but didn't look at it, keeping my eyes on Karen instead. "I'd like to see where in the bylaws it states that the HOA can use private property without the owner's consent," I said calmly, "because I've read them thoroughly and I don't recall any such provision." For the first time, Karen's confident expression wavered. She clearly hadn't expected me to challenge her directly or to have read the bylaws at all. Most people probably just took her word for what they contained. She recovered quickly, though, straightening her posture and narrowing her eyes slightly. The interpretation of the bylaws falls to the board, and as president, I can assure you that we're well within our rights. If you're going to be difficult about this, I should warn you that it won't reflect well on you. Community participation is highly valued here. You wouldn't want the entire neighborhood to think you're uncooperative, would you? It was a threat, plain and simple, dressed up as concern. The implication was clear: go along with her plans or become a pariah. I had no doubt that Karen could make life difficult for me through a combination of petty fines, gossip, and social pressure. But what she didn't understand was that I had something she didn't: actual legal standing. I smiled politely and handed the unsigned paper back to her. I'll need to review this with my attorney. I'm sure you understand the importance of due diligence when it comes to legal matters and liability concerns. Karen's face tightened, the practiced smile becoming strained. There's really no need for attorneys. We're all neighbors here. But if you insist on being difficult, don't be surprised if the board needs to take a closer look at your vineyard's compliance with our landscaping guidelines. I've noticed some potential issues already. She gathered her papers with quick, irritated movements, shoving them back into her folder. As she headed toward the door, she turned for one parting shot. Think carefully about the position you're taking. This event is happening whether you like it or not. You can either be a team player and earn some goodwill, or you can make enemies of the very people who determine whether your stay here is pleasant or problematic. With that, she let herself out, closing the door with just enough force to convey her displeasure without quite slamming it. Through the window, I watched her march down my walkway, phone already at her ear, no doubt rallying her supporters or planning her next move. I sat down at my kitchen table, a plan already forming in my mind. Karen wanted a wine event? Well, perhaps it was time to show her exactly who she was dealing with. If she wanted to play with fire, I'd make sure she got burned. With all the proper permits, of course. First thing the next morning, I called Tony Martinez, my cousin and longtime legal counsel for my wine business. Tony had helped me navigate the complex world of alcohol licensing, distribution agreements, and property acquisitions since I'd started Obscurus Vines 7 years ago. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was one of the few people who understood both my passion for winemaking and my desire for privacy. After explaining the situation with Karen and the HOA, Tony's response was a low whistle followed by a chuckle. "Your HOA president is playing a dangerous game," he said. "To state the obvious, they have absolutely zero authority to hold an alcohol event on your property without your consent. But it's worse than that. They're planning to serve wine to the public, possibly charging for it, without any of the required permits or licenses. That's not just trespassing, it's a violation of state liquor laws." Tony promised to prepare a formal cease-and-desist letter, but also suggested a more strategic approach first. "Let's gather evidence and let her dig herself in deeper," he advised. "The more concrete plans she makes without your permission, the stronger our position becomes. And if she's actually collecting money for this event, that could potentially cross into fraud territory." After our call, I immediately began documenting everything. I took screenshots of all the online announcements, saved emails where neighbors had mentioned the event, and started a detailed log of all interactions with Karen and the HOA. This wasn't just about stopping the event anymore. It was about establishing a pattern of behavior that would give me leverage in any future conflicts. With Tony's guidance, I drafted a brief, formal email to the city office that oversees permits and licensing for our county. I didn't mention Karen or the HOA by name, simply inquiring, "I've heard rumors of a planned wine tasting event on my property at 1487 Vineyard Lane. As the property owner and holder of the only valid wine production license for this address, I want to verify whether anyone has applied for the necessary event permits, as I have not authorized any such gathering." I copied the Alcohol Beverage Control Department as well, knowing that they took unauthorized alcohol service very seriously. The response came back within hours. No permits had been requested or issued for my address, and they thanked me for bringing this to their attention. They assured me they would be monitoring the situation and would send an inspector if they received any reports of an unauthorized event proceeding. Meanwhile, Karen was escalating her promotional efforts. A formal event page had appeared on the neighborhood social network, complete with a digital flyer featuring more unauthorized photos of my vineyard. The description had been expanded to include premium wine tastings and an exclusive auction of select vintages, with proceeds allegedly going toward a community garden project. Nearly 40 neighbors had already marked themselves as attending, with more indicating interest. Some had posted questions about the types of wine that would be available, which Karen had answered vaguely with promises of high-quality selections and something for everyone's taste. She had even started a thread soliciting volunteers to help with setup and serving, positioning the whole thing as a community-building opportunity. What struck me most about the online chatter was how few people questioned whether the event was legitimate or authorized. The power Karen wielded in the community was evident in the automatic assumption that everything was above board simply because she was involved. One neighbor had tentatively asked, "Has the vineyard owner agreed to this?" Only to be quickly assured by Karen that everything has been arranged with the property manager, a position that didn't exist as I managed my own property. The questioner had accepted this without further inquiry, thanking Karen for organizing such a classy event for the neighborhood. The blind trust was astonishing and a little disturbing. I considered posting a direct contradiction but decided against it for the moment. Tony's advice to let Karen continue building her house of cards made strategic sense. The more time and effort she invested, the more public the eventual fallout would be. Plus, I wanted to see just how far she would go with this charade. Would she actually start collecting money for tickets? Would she try to purchase wine for an event that couldn't legally take place? Every step she took dug her hole deeper, and I was content to watch her work, for now. The key would be timing my intervention for maximum impact, while ensuring that no actual trespassing occurred on my property. I had already arranged to upgrade my security system, adding cameras at the vineyard entrance and along the perimeter, with real-time alerts sent to my phone if anyone crossed onto my land. Later that afternoon, I received a notification from the neighborhood platform that Karen had posted an update. Due to overwhelming interest, we've decided to make tickets available early, $45 per person, with all proceeds supporting our new community garden. Wine, appetizers, and a beautiful venue. What more could you ask for? Limited spots available. She had included a link to an online payment system. She was now actively collecting money for an unauthorized event on my property, involving alcohol she had no license to serve. It was time to alert the city officials again. I forwarded the updated information to my contacts at the permit office and the ABC board, who responded that they would be sending Karen a formal warning letter regarding potential violations of liquor laws and event permitting requirements. The following day, I spotted Karen walking along the sidewalk that bordered my property, phone in hand, apparently taking more pictures or making notes. She didn't see me watching from between the rows of vines where I was checking the trellises. Her confident posture and self-satisfied expression as she surveyed what she clearly viewed as her upcoming venue made my blood boil, but I remained hidden, allowing her to complete her unauthorized inspection. This wasn't just about the principle anymore. It was about ensuring that someone who showed such flagrant disregard for boundaries and laws faced appropriate consequences for her actions. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to build my defense and my counterattack. After monitoring Karen's escalating efforts, Tony and I implemented our strategy with a formal letter to Karen and the entire HOA board. The document clearly stated that I had not authorized any event on my property and that collecting money for unauthorized alcohol service constituted potential violations of trespassing and liquor laws. The letter warned of legal consequences if the situation continued and demanded removal of all promotional materials and refund of collected funds. Tony delivered this via certified mail and I forwarded digital copies to ensure Karen couldn't keep the matter private. The reaction was immediate. Confused neighbors messaged me about a misunderstanding and the HOA forum filled with demands for ticket refunds. Karen predictably doubled down, posting that there was merely a minor miscommunication and that she was working with the property manager, perpetuating the fiction that I wasn't managing my own vineyard. "Rest assured your tickets are still valid," she claimed, underestimating both my resolve and the legal implications of her action. Within hours, Karen received an official notice from the city permit office stating they were aware of the planned event and that no permits had been issued. The document warned that proceeding could result in fines up to $10,000 and potential criminal charges. My earlier inquiries had put the event on their radar, and Karen's continued promotion had triggered enforcement. Karen then shifted strategies, filing a hasty application for an event permit categorized as a neighborhood cultural program, rather than mentioning alcohol. When Tony learned of this, he immediately filed a formal objection as the property owner, triggering an automatic hold on the application. The city official handling the case called to confirm I hadn't authorized use of my property. Karen's frustration became evident when she emailed demanding I stop interfering with community activities and threatening that my continued obstruction may necessitate a comprehensive review of your compliance with all HOA guidelines. I forwarded this to Tony without responding, adding it to our documentation of potential harassment. I then posted a factual statement to the community board clarifying that I hadn't authorized any events and explaining the legal requirements for private property use and alcohol service. The community response showed a shifting tide. While some still defended Karen, many began questioning her authority and methods rather than accepting her declarations at face value. Karen's response was dramatic. At an emergency HOA meeting I wasn't invited to, she proposed pursuing a community easement for my vineyard, claiming its visual impact gave the HOA certain rights over its use. This desperate attempt to formalize her claim through HOA mechanisms signaled she recognized her original plan was failing but wasn't willing to back down. The battle was intensifying, with Karen clearly unwilling to concede defeat, despite her increasingly precarious position. Karen launched her campaign for a community easement on my property immediately, distributing flyers containing a petition for neighborhood preservation. The document portrayed me as a reclusive owner, hoarding a neighborhood asset, and called for an easement allowing the HOA to utilize the vineyard's aesthetic value for community events. Karen needed 50 signatures, about a third of the neighborhood, and began going door to door with her allies, applying pressure through subtle threats about problem resident lists and claims about property values suffering. Within 3 days, she had collected 38 signatures. Jake Miller, my next-door neighbor, visited to warn me. "They're really pushing this petition hard," he said. "Karen cornered me yesterday, and when I objected, she hinted that my backyard pergola request might face complicated approval issues if I was difficult." I signed just to avoid trouble, but many people feel the same way. They're just afraid to cross her. Martha Collins, an elderly resident who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, also came to warn me. "This Karen is something else entirely. She's turned what used to be a helpful organization into her personal fiefdom," she said. Martha had refused to sign, telling Karen directly that in all her years, the HOA had never attempted to claim rights to someone's private property. "I'm 82, what's she gonna do to me? I've outlived 3 husbands. I can handle one power-hungry HOA president." These warnings made it clear that Karen's influence was substantial enough to make residents fear retaliation. After consulting with Tony, I decided to reveal more about myself to a select group of supportive neighbors. I invited Jake, Martha, and a handful of others to my home and was direct. "What Karen doesn't know, what none of you know, is that I'm not just someone who happens to own a vineyard. I'm actually the winemaker and owner of Obscurus Vines." The revelation caused surprise. Obscurus wasn't a household name, but wine enthusiasts would recognize it as an acclaimed boutique label. I explained that the vineyard was my livelihood and business, and detailed the legal requirements for wine tastings and alcohol service. I showed them my business licenses, permits, and property title with its agricultural zoning. When Karen promotes an unauthorized wine event here, she's potentially committing multiple regulatory violations that could result in heavy fines. Martha remarked, "So Karen is trying to take over a professional winemaker's vineyard? That's like hosting a bake sale in a professional bakery without asking the baker." Jake added, "No wonder you've been so resistant. She's not just imposing on your property, she's interfering with your actual business." I asked them to share this factual information with neighbors when opportunities arose, wanting decisions based on truth rather than misleading characterization. The HOA meeting the following night proved explosive. Karen presented her petition, now with 46 signatures, as a community initiative to enhance neighborhood amenities. Before she could finish, Martha stood and announced, "The vineyard Karen wants to claim is not some hobby farm. It's the production facility for Obscurus Vines, a respected commercial winery." The revelation caused an immediate stir. Someone verified this on their phone, showing the Obscurus website with glimpses of a vineyard recognizable as mine. When questioned directly if she'd known about my commercial operation, Karen's hesitation before denying knowledge spoke volumes. As her plan unraveled, she made increasingly desperate claims about zoning violations and environmental risks, finally declaring, "If he won't voluntarily share his precious vineyard, we'll pursue a mandatory easement through legal channels." The HOA treasurer intervened. "I think we need to reconsider this initiative. If we're potentially forcing a legal issue with a legitimate business owner, the HOA could face significant liability." The majority voted to postpone any decision on the petition, and Karen stormed out without properly adjourning the meeting. This victory was significant but temporary. Conversations afterward indicated growing skepticism about Karen's leadership, but I knew she wouldn't accept defeat easily. The question remained, what would her next move be, and was I prepared to counter it? The week following the contentious HOA meeting was deceptively quiet. Karen had gone uncharacteristically silent on community channels, and her usual presence at the neighborhood mailboxes or walking her dog down the central pathways was noticeably absent. Some neighbors speculated that she was embarrassed by the public exposure of her misinformation campaign. Others wondered if she was simply regrouping before launching her next offensive. I knew better than to assume she had given up. People like Karen don't retreat when challenged, they escalate. I remained vigilant, checking my security cameras regularly and keeping in close contact with Tony about our legal positioning should further conflicts arise. My caution proved warranted when 9 days after the HOA meeting, a completely new event page appeared on social media platforms. Unlike the previous neighborhood-specific announcements, this was a public event, listed under the title Wine Country Experience, Exclusive Tasting and Auction, with my address clearly displayed as the venue. The page had been created by a newly formed entity called Westfield Community Events, obviously Karen's attempt to distance the event from the HOA while still maintaining control. The description promised an afternoon in an authentic vineyard setting with premium wine selections and a chance to bid on rare bottles. Tickets were priced at $60, up from the original $45, with the listing stating that proceeds support local community enhancement. Most alarmingly, the page included a countdown timer. The event was scheduled for just 10 days away. This was a significant escalation. Karen had moved from internal community channels to public platforms, effectively advertising a commercial event on my private property to the entire region. She had established what appeared to be a business entity to collect funds, though a quick search by Tony confirmed that Westfield Community Events wasn't registered with the state as a legitimate organization or nonprofit, and she had substantially increased the ticket price, suggesting this was no longer even pretending to be just a community fundraiser, but was now a profit-generating venture. Within 24 hours, the event page showed over 70 people interested and 32 going, many of whom were not residents of our neighborhood but wine enthusiasts from surrounding areas who had no idea they were RSVPing to an unauthorized event. Tony was blunt in his assessment when I called him. "She's crossed from potentially troublesome behavior into actual legal liability," he said. "Collecting money for services, especially alcohol service, that she has no permit to provide on property she has no right to use. That's fraud territory, and she's doing it under a business name that doesn't legally exist. We've moved beyond HOA overreach into potential criminal issues. He advised me to immediately contact both local law enforcement and the Alcohol Control Board to file formal complaints, which I did that afternoon. The officer who took my report seemed initially skeptical, viewing it as merely a neighborhood dispute, until I explained that people were paying money for an event that purported to include alcohol service without licensing. That detail changed his demeanor entirely, and he assured me they would look into it. The Alcohol Control Board was even more responsive. The agent I spoke with explained that they took unauthorized sales and service extremely seriously, not just as regulatory violations but as public safety issues. Proper licensing isn't just bureaucratic red tape, she explained. It ensures that alcohol is handled responsibly, that servers are trained to prevent overservice, and that minors are protected. She promised to send an investigator to review the online materials and to have enforcement officers present on the scheduled date to ensure no illegal service took place. I provided her with screenshots of all the promotional materials, the payment links, and Karen's various communications about the event. Rather than confront Karen directly, which might only push her to further subterfuge, I decided on a more strategic approach. I submitted a formal cease-and-desist letter to the email address listed on the event page, copying it to Karen's personal email, the HOA board, and the city permit office. The letter, drafted by Tony, was explicit. You are promoting and selling tickets to an event on private property without the owner's consent, involving alcohol service without proper licensing. This constitutes trespassing, fraud, and potential violations of state alcohol laws. All promotional materials must be removed immediately, all ticket sales refunded, and all plans for this event abandoned. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and referral to law enforcement and regulatory agencies. The letter included my full legal name and professional credentials, making it unmistakably clear who I was and that I had the authority to make these demands. Karen's response came within hours, not to me or Tony, but in an update to the event page and a mass email to all ticket purchasers. Important update, it read. Due to unexpected interference, we may need to relocate our event. The current property owner is unfortunately not supportive of community initiatives. We are working on securing an alternate venue and will update all attendees as soon as possible. Your tickets remain valid and the event will proceed as scheduled, though possibly at a different address. She was still collecting money while acknowledging she had no venue, a tacit admission that she knew she was selling tickets to an event she couldn't guarantee would happen as advertised. This update triggered a flurry of comments and questions on the event page. Some people asked for clarification about the venue situation. Others expressed concern about having purchased tickets for an event that might be relocated or canceled. Karen responded to these with vague reassurances. Everything is under control. We're handling a minor logistics issue. The event experience will be exactly as promised. But as hours passed without any concrete details on the supposed alternate venue, skepticism grew. A few commenters began demanding refunds, which Karen initially ignored, then responded to with a newly added no refunds policy that hadn't been present when tickets first went on sale. Despite the mounting questions and the clear legal warnings, Karen doubled down. 3 days after my cease-and-desist letter, she posted a defiant update. Venue confirmed. The wine country experience will proceed as originally planned at our beautiful Vineyard location. Don't listen to misleading information from those who don't understand community spirit. We have everything handled and this will be the event of the season. She had removed my specific address from the listing, but included a map pin that still pointed directly to my property, along with driving directions that led straight to my front gate. It was a blatant act of defiance, and it removed any doubt about her intentions. The final straw came when Jake texted me a photo he'd taken while driving past the entrance to my property. Karen had placed a large, professionally printed sign just outside my fence line. Wine event this Saturday, parking entrance 500 feet ahead, with an arrow pointing toward my driveway. She had actually begun setting up for an event that she had been repeatedly warned was unauthorized and potentially illegal. I immediately called Tony, who advised me to document everything but not to remove the sign myself, as that might give Karen grounds to claim I was interfering with community property. Instead, he contacted the County Roads Department to report unauthorized signage on the public right-of-ways, which they promptly removed as a routine matter. As the scheduled event date grew closer, Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She posted daily countdowns and teasers about the wines that would supposedly be available, even specifying vintages and vineyards that had nothing to do with my operation. She announced that a renowned sommelier would be leading tastings, no name provided, and certainly no one I had authorized. She even posted photos of table settings and decoration concepts, implying that preparations were actively underway on my property, when in fact my security cameras confirmed that no one had attempted to enter the vineyard itself. The entire production existed only in Karen's social media posts, and presumably in her increasingly desperate imagination. The day before the scheduled event, I received reports from multiple neighbors that Karen and several volunteers were distributing flyers at local businesses and on car windshields throughout the area, making a last-minute push for attendance. The flyers now advertised tastings of exclusive Obscurus Vines products not available to the general public, directly and falsely claiming affiliation with my brand. This was beyond trespassing and unauthorized events. It was now trademark infringement and false advertising. I forwarded images of the flyers to Tony, who immediately filed additional complaints with the Consumer Protection Division of the State Attorney General's office and sent another more strongly worded cease and desist directly to Karen's home address via courier. By Friday evening, the die was cast. Karen had ignored every warning, every legal notice, and every opportunity to back down gracefully. She was still actively promoting an event scheduled for noon the following day, still collecting payments, and still claiming it would take place on my property with my wines. I had secured my perimeter, confirmed with local law enforcement and the Alcohol Control Board that they would have personnel in the area, and prepared for whatever scene might unfold when attendees began arriving for an event that could not and would not take place. I didn't want a confrontation, but Karen had left me no choice but to stand firm in defense of my property and my business. As I checked my security cameras one last time before trying to sleep, I wondered how someone could become so committed to a course of action that was so clearly headed for disaster. Tomorrow would provide the answer, one way or another. Saturday morning dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for a vineyard event, had one actually been authorized. I was up early, reviewing security camera feeds and confirming that my property remained undisturbed. The tension of the past weeks had culminated in this day, and despite my confidence in my legal position, I felt a knot of anxiety about how events would unfold. Would attendees be angry when they discovered the truth? Would Karen attempt some last-minute stunt to save face? The uncertainty was unsettling, but I was prepared for whatever came next. By 10:30 a.m., my cameras picked up the first signs of activity. Karen arrived in her silver SUV, parking on the public road near my front gate. She was alone but carried several bags and what looked like a folding table. She set up this makeshift welcome station on the public shoulder beside my driveway entrance. Technically not on my property, but positioned to intercept arriving guests. She arranged brochures, name tags, and even a cash box on the table, then hung a banner between two portable stands, "Wine Country Experience" in elegant script, above a clip art grapevine. It was both pathetic and audacious, a final desperate attempt to create the illusion that the event was proceeding as planned. I watched this performance from my home office, simultaneously on the phone with Tony, who was parked a discreet distance down the road. "She's actually going through with it," I said, disbelieving despite the evidence on my screen. "She's setting up a check-in table on the roadside." Tony sighed audibly. "Well, we anticipated this possibility. The authorities have been notified and they should be arriving soon. Just maintain your position inside your property line. Don't engage directly unless absolutely necessary." I agreed, though watching Karen's determined preparations made it difficult to remain passive. By 11:15, the first attendees began to arrive. Couples and small groups in summer casual attire, clearly expecting a sophisticated wine tasting, approached Karen's table with anticipation. From my camera feed, I could see her animated gestures as she greeted them, checked their names off a list, and handed out name tags. She was pointing toward my locked gate with what appeared to be reassuring smiles, though I couldn't hear what explanation she was offering for why guests were being held at the roadside rather than allowed onto the actual vineyard. Some seemed confused but accepted whatever story she provided. Others looked more skeptical, glancing between the rustic welcome table and my clearly secured property with visible concern. Within half an hour, about 20 people had gathered along the roadside, standing awkwardly in the narrow space between the pavement and the drainage ditch. There was no parking area, so cars were beginning to line both sides of the rural road, creating a potential traffic hazard. Guests were starting to look restless, checking their watches and phones, presumably wondering when they would actually be allowed onto the vineyard property they had paid to visit. Karen maintained her hostess smile, but even through the grainy security feed, I could see the strain in her expression as she attempted to manage the increasingly awkward situation. At precisely noon, the official start time listed on all event materials, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up, followed closely by an unmarked car with State Alcohol Control Board insignia on its door. 2 uniformed deputies and a plainclothes ABC investigator emerged and approached Karen's table. Even from a distance, I could see the color drain from her face as they identified themselves. The lead deputy spoke with her for several minutes, while the ABC agent addressed the gathered crowd, who had fallen silent at the official's arrival. I couldn't hear the conversation, but body language told the story. Karen's arms crossed defensively, then her hands gesticulated in apparent explanation, and finally her shoulders slumped in defeat as the deputy continued speaking with unwavering authority. I decided it was time to make my appearance. I walked down my driveway to the gate where I could observe the scene directly while remaining on my own property. As I approached, I could finally hear portions of the ongoing conversations. The ABC investigator was explaining to the assembled guests. Unauthorized event with no valid permits for alcohol service. Unfortunately, this means the advertised wine tasting cannot legally proceed. If you've purchased tickets, you should contact the organizer regarding refunds, and you may wish to file a complaint with Consumer Protection Services if refunds are not provided. The crowd's reaction was a mix of confusion, disappointment, and growing anger, with several people immediately turning to Karen with demands for explanation. The deputy speaking with Karen noticed my arrival at the gate and approached me, asking for identification to confirm I was indeed the property owner. After examining my ID, he explained the situation. Ms. Westfield claims there was a misunderstanding about permissions for this event. She says she believed she had verbal approval to use your vineyard. I maintained my composure, showing him copies of the multiple cease-and-desist notices and communications explicitly denying any such permission. The deputy nodded, unsurprised. That matches what the alcohol board investigator told us. We're shutting this down now. No one will be allowed onto your property. Karen, seeing me speaking with the deputy, broke away from the second officer and stormed toward the gate, her face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and rage. "This is all your fault," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "We could have had a beautiful community event. Do you have any idea how much time I've put into planning this? How many people are disappointed because of your selfishness?" The deputy stepped between us, warning Karen to maintain a respectful distance and tone. She ignored him, continuing her tirade. "You never gave this a chance. You never even tried to work with me. What kind of neighbor does that make you?" It was time to end this charade once and for all. I addressed Karen calmly, but loudly enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "Ms. Westfield, I am James Mercer, owner of this property and founder of Obscurus Vines Winery. You have been attempting to host an unauthorized event on my commercial vineyard, selling access to my private property without consent, and falsely advertising the service of my wines without licensing or permission. You have ignored multiple legal notices and continued to collect money for an event you knew could not legally take place. These are not the actions of someone interested in community building. They are the actions of someone who believes rules don't apply to them." A murmur ran through the crowd at this revelation. Several people took out their phones, presumably searching for information about obscurest vines and confirming my identity. Karen's face cycled through expressions: shock that I had publicly identified myself, anger at being called out, and finally a desperate attempt to salvage her position. "He's exaggerating," she said, turning to the crowd. There were just some minor permissions we were still finalizing. If he had been cooperative instead of obstructive, everything would have been fine. This is a case of one selfish individual against the entire community. Her attempt to redirect blame fell flat as the ABC investigator stepped forward with a clipboard filled with documents. "Actually, Ms. Westfield, we have copies of multiple warnings sent to you regarding this event dating back several weeks. You were explicitly informed that serving alcohol without proper licensing is illegal, that using private property without owner consent is trespassing, and that collecting money for services you cannot legally provide potentially constitutes fraud. Yet you continued advertising and selling tickets, even after acknowledging in writing that you were aware of these issues." She held up printed copies of Karen's own updates where she had admitted knowing about the venue issues while continuing to promote the event. The crowd's mood had shifted decisively. What had begun as disappointment about a canceled wine tasting had transformed into anger directed squarely at Karen as they realized they had been misled. "You knew this wasn't approved?" one woman demanded. "We drove over an hour to get here." Another attendee, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, was more direct. "I want my $60 back right now." Others joined in with similar demands, closing in around Karen's table where the cash box sat in plain view. The deputies moved quickly to maintain order, creating space around Karen while firmly instructing everyone to step back. "We will be taking statements from anyone who purchased tickets," the lead deputy announced to the group. "This is now part of an official investigation into potential fraudulent activity. Ms. Westfield will not be processing refunds directly at this time. That will be handled through proper channels once our investigation is complete." He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the station to provide a formal statement regarding this event and your collection of funds." It wasn't an arrest yet, but it was clear that Karen's position had deteriorated from HOA president overstepping her authority to potential criminal suspect. As the deputies escorted a shell-shocked Karen to their cruiser, the ABC investigator and a newly arrived county official began taking contact information from attendees and documenting their ticket purchases. The crowd slowly dispersed, some lingering to share their frustrations with each other, others leaving immediately to salvage what remained of their weekend plans. Through it all, I remained at my gate, answering questions when approached, but mostly observing the unraveling of Karen's grand scheme with a mixture of vindication and genuine sympathy for the disappointed attendees who had been caught in her web of deception. Tony joined me as the last of the crowd was leaving. "That went about as well as could be expected," he said quietly. "The authorities handled it professionally, and most importantly, your property rights were protected." I nodded in agreement, though the victory felt somewhat hollow amidst the chaos and disappointment that had unfolded. "What happens to Karen now?" I asked. Tony's expression was grave but satisfied. "At minimum, she's facing civil penalties for the permit violations. The fraud aspect depends on how many people file complaints and whether the prosecutor believes she was knowingly deceiving people rather than just being incompetent. Either way, her days of neighborhood tyranny are likely over. News of this will spread quickly." As we walked back up my driveway toward the house, I glanced back at the now deserted roadside where Karen's sad welcome table still stood, abandoned in her hasty departure with the deputies. The banner had come loose on one side and flapped pathetically in the breeze, an apt metaphor for her collapsed plans. What had begun as an HOA president's overreach had escalated into a public spectacle, with legal consequences, all because of an unwillingness to accept the simple truth that she had no right to use someone else's property without permission. The vineyard stood serene around us, the vines undisturbed by the drama that had played out at its borders, continuing their quiet, patient work of creating something of genuine value and beauty. The aftermath of the wine event that never was spread quickly through the neighborhood. By Sunday, everyone knew about Karen's detention for questioning, her misrepresentation of having permission to use my vineyard, and her continued collection of money despite warnings. What began as her attempt to establish dominance had instead exposed her pattern of overreach and dishonesty to the entire community. The HOA board called an emergency session Monday evening, which I attended along with nearly every homeowner, a record turnout. Karen was notably absent, having sent a brief email stating she was dealing with personal matters and would address the recent misunderstanding later. The vice president opened with a formal apology to me, clarifying that the actions taken by Ms. Westfield were her own and did not have board authorization at any stage. What followed was community catharsis as residents shared their experiences with Karen's leadership style, arbitrary rule enforcement, personal vendettas, and intimidation of anyone questioning her authority. By meeting's end, the board unanimously removed Karen from her position as president and established a committee to reform HOA guidelines and enforcement procedures. Several residents nominated me to serve on this committee, citing my principled stand for property rights, and I accepted, recognizing that participating in community governance was better than isolation. On the legal front, Karen received a formal citation and fine from the Alcohol Control Board for attempting unauthorized alcohol service. The prosecutor required her to refund all ticket purchasers and pay an additional civil penalty. Most significantly, these findings triggered a professional ethics review at her real estate agency, resulting in administrative leave. Throughout this process, I maintained a low profile, neither celebrating her downfall nor adding to her troubles, which seemed to enhance my standing, as neighbors respected what they perceived as graciousness in victory. A month later, Martha Collins appeared at my door with an unexpected proposal. "That vineyard of yours is truly the jewel of our neighborhood, but most folks have never seen it up close. What happened with Karen was unfortunate, but her basic instinct wasn't wrong. Sharing your beautiful creation would be wonderful. The mistake was trying to take without asking." She fixed me with a pointed look. "So I'm asking, properly and respectfully, would you consider hosting a small, legitimate neighborhood gathering? No alcohol service, no tickets, just neighbors appreciating something special." Her wisdom was compelling. After consulting with Tony, I worked with the new HOA board to plan a vineyard open house that would allow neighbors to visit, learn about viticulture, and enjoy the setting without any wine service that would trigger licensing requirements. The event, held on a perfect September Saturday, featured vineyard tours, educational displays, and a talk by a local botany professor. Jake helped organize, commenting, "This is what community is supposed to be about, sharing what we love while respecting boundaries." Karen never understood that real connection can't be forced. It has to be freely given. Late in the afternoon, I noticed Karen's silver SUV drive slowly past the entrance before continuing down the road. Her brief observation of the successful authorized gathering she had tried to force into existence felt like the closing of a chapter. As the last guests departed, Martha lingered, smiling knowingly. "You've turned things around nicely, from neighborhood mystery man to respected community member, all while maintaining your privacy and standing your ground." I admitted it wasn't what I initially wanted when seeking solitude for my work, but perhaps this balance was healthier. Connection without intrusion, community without obligation. Martha patted my arm. "That's the wisdom most people never find, that we need both boundaries and bridges to live well with others. Karen only saw power and control. You stood firm on boundaries but built a bridge of your own choosing. That's why you won in all the ways that truly matter." In the months that followed, the reformed HOA became a positive rather than punitive presence. Karen sold her house and moved away. My vineyard flourished, producing what promised to be one of Obscurus Vine's finest vintages, and I found myself an integrated, respected community member while still maintaining the privacy essential to my creative work. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about winning a battle. It's about establishing terms for authentic peace. The best vintages, after all, come not from force, but from patience, understanding, and allowing things to develop in their own proper time.